Today I want to talk about how the Femina Miss India pageant impacted the image of women in India in the 90s and 2000s all the way through to today. This is related to Indian film, which is the main thing I talk about, because images of women in India are primarily propagated through film, and the relationship between the Femina Miss India pageant and film stars is pretty obvious and direct. So, rewinding a bit. The Miss India pageant started as something that was sponsored by textile manufacturers who was primarily meant to promote sari fabric, essentially. Throughout the 1980s, the winners basically looked like Indian womanhood. Juhi Chawla is one of the most famous and successful of them. So they weren't necessarily that very tall. They had round faces and round figures. They looked really good in a sari. They were also extremely young. I think Juhi won when she was only 16 years old, and that was kind of the norm. And that was Miss India, and it was just sort of a local thing. They never really made it to the international competitions, and nobody ever really cared. It was a cool thing to do if you were in Bombay and it was easy to go to the competition, and then maybe you'd get a modeling contract or an acting contract out of it. Starting in the early 90s, Femina made a conscious decision that they were going to go after the global market. They wanted to win the big contests. They wanted to win Miss Universe, Miss World, etc. And as we all know, they were very successful in this. But what did they change in order to make that happen? Well, the first thing they changed is what they were looking for in a contestant. In order to be selected, you had to be above 5 feet 6 inches tall, you had to be able to fill out an application form in English, and you had to have the right look. Which we can just look at the contestants they chose, not even the winners, just the contestants they chose, and we know what that look is. Tall, thin, high cheekbones. Not the Indian beauty, not the short, round, full-figured beauty, Juhi Chawla, Sridevi. Basically, everybody who we see as the most beautiful woman in India pre-1990 would not have qualified for this contest as it became. And then once you were selected, and this is based on 2 very in-depth studies, which I'll be linking to in the description below, but according to those studies, once you were selected, you would go to a training camp that lasted, I think, 6 weeks. You would not be allowed to talk to your family or anyone else outside. Your family would sign over complete control, if you were underage, to the trainers, and you would sign over complete control of yourself in every way to these trainers. All the girls were put on incredibly restrictive diets and exercise schedules. They routinely dropped, 20, 30 pounds. I don't know what that would be in Indian weight measurements because I'm not good with those scales, but an unhealthy amount of weight in a very short amount of time. Obviously, they were also all put on whitening pills, lotions, creams, etc. The explanation for this was that the Westerners don't care, but the Indian people will expect you to be pale so they can be proud of you. So that is why you have to take in these toxic chemicals in a variety of formats so that the Indian people can be proud of you when they see you on TV. And they also received all sorts of other training on manners, on ways of walking, on this, that, and the other thing. The training that I found most interesting that they received was in how to wear a sari. Because the thing is, none of these contestants routinely wore saris. They did not know how to wear them, they did not know how to walk in them, they did not know any of that. And the Femina Miss India people were very firm about every single contestant. Not even the winners who are going overseas, but just to be able to be in the official Indian contest has to know how to wear a sari. Now, I find this fascinating because the thing is, the kind of contestant they were looking for, tall, thin, speaks English well, is comfortable wearing westernized makeup and westernized clothes, that kind of woman in India would not routinely wear a sari. It's just not something that would be part of their lives. They're the kind of person who wears jeans and casual clothes, who travels overseas a lot, who wears, I don't know, Max Factor mascara instead of kohl on their eyes. There's a million different little things that are different about the kind of woman they're looking for, which would make that person not someone who would wear a sari. And yet, they said, in order to represent us, both within India and internationally, you have to wear a sari. They're creating an illusion. They're creating a woman who doesn't exist. That there is an Indian woman somewhere who's fluent in English and comfortable in the global world, but also still dresses traditionally all the time. This isn't something that comes together. And it wasn't just about the sari. Remember how I mentioned back in the day, these were very young contestants. Juhi Chawla was only 16 years old. So back in the day, the traditional Miss India would come up, would say, I've never dated, I've never lived outside my family's home, I have no ambition, and so forth and so on. Which is a fine thing to say, especially if you're 16 years old. Because when you're 16, I would want all of that to be true. I would want you to say, yes, I've never had a serious boyfriend or any boyfriend, I've never disobeyed my parents, and so on, because they're still essentially little girls. But these new contestants, they're looking at somewhere between 20 and 25 maybe, maybe 18, 19 on the younger end. And they're also looking for people who, again, have this certain persona. And if you have that certain persona, there's a decent chance that you've already been away to school for a little bit. You've probably already dated. You probably don't have to obey your parents all the time. There's a lot of flexibility that would be built into your life. But that's not an okay thing to say when you're representing all of India. So they take these women who look like a certain type of women and train them to recite certain standards and then present that to the world. Say, this is the Indian woman. She wears makeup, she looks gorgeous, she's comfortable in t-shirts and blue jeans, but she's also comfortable in a sari, and she would never consider dating or disobeying her parents. They create this whole illusion. So I've been focusing on the one half of it, the fake sari, never disobeying the parents part of it, but the other half of it is also a little bit fake. One other thing they talked about in the training camp is anytime these women had to leave the hotel compound in which they were locked inside, they had to go under heavy guard and in closed vans because they were being trained to present themselves with the makeup and the hair and the short dresses and everything in a way that was literally unsafe in Indian society. They could not walk down the street in India dressed the way they were being taught to dress. So there's two parts that are false. Nobody in India is that sexualized because it is unsafe to be that sexualized in India. And nobody in India who is this fluent in English and this comfortable in a global world is still that traditional in the saris and everything. So why do I care? Why does it matter that Femina created this fake image? Well, it matters for two reasons. First, just generally, they had these incredibly specific descriptions of what beauty means. And anytime you get that specific, it's unhealthy because not all women look the same. Not all people look the same. And to say that there is only one type of woman that's acceptable, that means what, 90–95% of women in the world are suddenly unacceptable. If you look at something like, Amar Akbar Anthony, all three heroines had very different body types, and all three heroines were considered beautiful and acceptable, and all three of them were extremely successful actresses as well. There was no one type you had to conform to in order to succeed. Now, just mentally flip through all of the actresses in Indian film post, say, 1998. They all look pretty identical, don't they? They're all somewhere between 5'6" and 5'9" feet tall. They all have slightly more of a higher cheekbone look instead of a round face look. They all have that Western style makeup and lipstick. All of them very similar. Where's our short women? Where's our fuller figured women? Where's our variety of womanhood? It all just kind of goes away post the Femina revolution in which everybody sat and watched on their TVs in India and went, oh, that is what Indian beauty is. Nothing else counts. The other reason it's dangerous is because of that conflict between the two identities. So first, women in India are being taught you have to be both hypersexual and hyper-traditional. Somehow. You have to go out on the street dressed in your super sexy outfits, but you can never ever flirt with a boy, and if a boy talks to you, it's the end of the world, and yet you're dressed in such a way that it seems as though you're inviting it. Or alternatively, if you embrace your sexuality and all of these things, well then you're destroying Indian culture because the face of Indian culture is the traditional woman who wears the sari and so on and so forth. This is an impossible conflict for a woman to resolve. And so you end up feeling guilty one way or the other. Either I enjoy wearing a sari and I enjoy my traditional makeup, I am not sexualized enough, I am unattractive, I am a failure as a woman. Or I enjoy being sexualized. I enjoy my Western clothes. I hate saris. I am not traditional enough. I am not maintaining Indian culture. I am a failure as a woman. There's no win here. The concern that's bigger for me as an outsider to Indian culture, I mean, what do I care about Indian womanhood? It's no pressure on me, I'm not an Indian woman, is the way it's presenting itself to the rest of the world. Because remember, these contestants were created with two ideas in mind. The first was how they would be presented to India. That's why they had to have the lightning creams, because India needs fair-faced women. And the second is how they would present themselves at the international contests and at all the international events that would follow once they won. This is what India wants to present to the world. We don't have any women's issues. We don't need your outside feminist agitators. Everybody in India is perfectly happy and fine. Indian women somehow are able to go out there in blue jeans, to have ambitions, to have careers, and yet still be completely content with an arranged marriage and a happy household. It's telling the world, we don't need your help. Our women don't need your help, we're fine. And this is where it gets really dangerous, because the world believed it, is still believing it. If you say something about the problems of women in India, there's a decent chance you'll get a response about, oh, you're just being prejudiced, oh, they're fine, oh, I saw this interview, it's their culture, and so on and so forth. There's a sort of brainwashing effect that's happened to the West, and we've bought into this idea of women in India can be ambitious and free and sexualized, but that does not mean that they can't also be fully fulfilled following all the Indian cultural traditions. And if you are to say otherwise, you're just proving your own ignorance and lack of sensitivity to their experiences. This is changing a little bit, at least in terms of Indian film. I mean, again, we all know this. I had you picture in your flip book every actress between the late 90s through the 2000s. Okay, now picture in your flip book every actress working today. And we do have some variety. Sonakshi Sinha, thank goodness, is a traditional Indian beauty. We've got a few other actresses who are more sort of going that route. Kangana refusing to straighten her hair, that's a really big deal. There's a lot of sort of differences falling into play. And one thing, and this is just sort of a bigger thing, you know how the Indian film audience is more and more going towards non-Hindi films. Notice the non-Hindi films also tend to have more realistic actresses. The one that really struck me is Billa, terrible Prabhas movie. The vamp in Billa, the sexy one, is a former Miss India contest. And she is a very heavy woman in Billa. Looks gorgeous, beautiful woman, but extremely full-figured. So I couldn't believe she was a Miss India contest. I looked her up. In her Miss India days, she was a stick. Based on how she looked like 6 weeks after the contest was over, they must have put her on the most dangerous diet they possibly could to get her down to that weight and keep her at that weight. As soon as the contest was over, she naturally ballooned up to her normal size and looks beautiful. And now she's down south playing sexy vamp characters. And these are the movies that are now doing well and moving more and more into the Hindi belt. There's still an interest in natural-looking women, both from male and female audience members, I assume, based on how things are tracking. And it would do well in the Hindi film group to realize this and to drop the artificial Miss India Femina concept of femininity. Besides all of the political and social issues I just listed off, it's just good business sense. Anyway, that's how it looks to me. You can absolutely agree with me or disagree with me or whatever you want to say. Just hop on over to my blog, don'tcallitbollywood.com, and leave me a comment. Thanks. Bye.